All right, the next section we're going to talk about is capacity of parties to contract. Capacity refers to a person's ability to be bound by a contract. 3 classes of persons lack capacity to be bound by contractual promises. Number 1, minors. Minors. Most of the time, in most states, this is anyone that's under 18. Minors can void most contracts that they enter into. So I gave you an example earlier when I was talking about voidable contracts of a minor that goes in and wants to buy a vehicle and then wants to return it a week later. Well, you might just have to take it back, because that contract is void from that minor's perspective. And that's another reason why you need to be very careful if you're ever dealing with minors, on big purchases. An exception to the general rule that minors can void contracts is promises to pay for necessaries of life, like food, clothing, shelter, medical care. And the reason for this is because the law and society, we don't want to discourage people from taking care of minors. So if a minor came to you and said, I need shelter for the night. And you said, well, I'm not going to rent you a room in my hotel because, you can just walk out tomorrow and not have to pay for it. Okay, so that would be a discouragement for me as a hotel owner to give you shelter. Or if it's a restaurant or something like that, and a minor comes in, or things. If you wouldn't provide food or shelter, medical care for the minor, then we don't want to encourage that as a society. So we say that those types of agreements are enforceable. A minor can't get out of paying for the hotel room. A minor, if they need shelter, they can't get out of paying for clothing, paying for food, or paying for medical care. Because if they could get out of it, then people wouldn't offer those services to the minors. Second class of persons who lack capacity to be bound by contractual promises are intoxicated persons. Intoxicated. But this is also often disputed, right? Remember the Lucy versus Zimmer case? And both of them might have been a little intoxicated. However, the fact that they were able to recall all of the events, that they had put a lot of thought, it looked like, into the contract. They even did it a couple times. All of those things led the court to believe that whether they were intoxicated or not, they still knew what was going on. So just be careful, though, when dealing with people that might have had a little drink, because you don't want them later on saying, hey, I was intoxicated. I should be able to get out of this contract. Third class of persons who lack capacity are mentally incompetent persons. Mentally incompetent. That's why you need to be very careful if you ever enter into an agreement with someone that might have a little something wrong with them, or maybe an elderly person that has dementia or something like that, because, just always err on the side of caution. Always err on the side of caution. And if you have to deal with someone like that, get witnesses. Get someone that says, yes, this person knew what was going on, or this person isn't mentally incompetent, or never been found mentally incompetent, that they know enough and they understand the contract. So protect yourself when you're dealing with some of these types of individuals so that they can't come back later and say that you took advantage of me, or they can't come back and say and get out of the contract. Always be above board. Lawful purpose, that's the next section. A basic requirement of a valid contract is legality of purpose. I think I gave you all the example earlier of if you hire a hitman, to kill your neighbor or something. You can't enforce that. No court is going to enforce that. Or at least in the state of Texas, say marijuana. If you want to hire someone to grow marijuana for you and you give them, $100,000 to do so and they don't do it, or they, do something else with their product instead of selling it to you, a court is not going to enforce an illegal activity. So you're out of luck if you are out money for an illegal contract. Contracts that require commission of a crime or tort violate accepted standards of behavior, public policy, are void. So there are certain contracts that are void because they violate public policy. For instance, you can't sell a child. All right, public policy. We want to discourage, that kind of thing. So you can't, even if you're poor and you don't have money, to take care of this child, you can't sell a child. There can't be this financial arrangement where you actually sell a child to someone else. You can't do that in the state of Texas. It goes against public policy. So there are certain contracts, they might be illegal, certain contracts that might violate public policy that the courts will not enforce. Other situations involving voidable contracts. So those are all voidable contracts. We talked about minors, they can void it. Some contracts, say the car contract on their own part, at least they can void it. Now, if you're the one that sold the car to the minor, you can't get out of it if the minor is okay with it, but the minor has the option to void it. So it's called a voidable contract. Okay, so other voidable contracts include contracts based on fraud, or misrepresentation. Those kinds of contracts are not enforceable and or are voidable. Okay, fraud involves an intentional misstatement of a material fact that induces one to rely justifiably to his or her injury. Let's go back to the example of a realtor selling a house. And let's say this realtor knew that the foundation of this house was crumbling. Knew that the foundation was bad. Maybe the owners had told them that. And the realtor, and let's say that the potential home buyer asked about the foundation. Hey, I like the house. It's pretty, nice colors. It looks really nice. Hey, how's the foundation? And if the realtor says, it's great. It's perfect. They just reinforced it last year. It'll last you for 50 years. It's a great foundation. That's fraud, okay? Because that is an intentional misstatement because you knew it was false. You knew it was wrong. Of a material fact, material foundation is a material fact for a house, and that induced the buyer to buy the house. And then if you bought the house and then found out, oh my gosh, I have to pay $10,000 to get the foundation fixed, that is definitely to that person's injury. So that's called fraud. There's a lot more examples of fraud in business, more than, I don't have time to talk about all of the ways that you can commit fraud in business. But some of them might be just lying to another person to try to get a loan. Hey, I make X number of dollars in my income. I have this amount of money in the bank, so I am good for a large loan. If the bank loaned you that money based on what you told them, and then later they find out after you've gone bankrupt that you didn't have that kind of salary, that you didn't have that money in the bank, then that's fraud. There's a lot of financial fraud. And a lot of financial fraud is when you're writing or when else someone is writing on a contract or something and you put something down. If it's not true and it's material and it winds up hurting the other person, maybe they wouldn't have made an agreement with you if they would have known that fact or that fact. That is fraud. Okay. Another important concept is called misrepresentation. And in law school, in other parts of the country, sometimes it's also called negligent misrepresentation. But the next blank is misrepresentation. It's simply a misstatement without intent to mislead, but does in fact cause injury to another party. That definition is a little bit simplistic, and that's why I like the word negligent before that, negligent misrepresentation, because let's go back to the example of the realtor and the potential home buyer. Let's say the realtor didn't know that the foundation was bad. The realtor didn't know one way or the other. But when asked the question about the foundation, the realtor said, "Oh yeah, it's a good foundation. Yeah, it's good." Okay? Then that would be a negligent misrepresentation if the foundation then turned out to be bad and then caused injury to the home buyer. It's negligent because maybe the realtor shouldn't have just said something without knowing whether it was truthful or not truthful. Okay? Maybe the realtor should have just said, "I don't know." That would have been the best thing for the realtor to have said, because the realtor didn't know. But if the realtor chooses to say something like, "Yeah, it's a good foundation," when they don't really know, then they can be sued for negligent misrepresentation, and the home buyer can get out of the contract, or the home buyer might be able to sue that realtor for the negligent misrepresentation, even though the realtor didn't have the intent to mislead, because they didn't know. It could have been a good foundation. They didn't know. But the fact that they made a statement, and a statement that was then relied on by the home buyer, then they have to stand by it. So when you're talking to a potential customer, potential client about something, if you don't know the answer, you should probably say, "I don't know," okay? Or "Let me look into that for you." Actually get down to, because I don't want to, give you a false impression. Think another thing you should think about as Christians is we should treat other people as we want to be treated, right? That's one of the commandments that Jesus gave us, was to treat other people like we want to be treated. And so wouldn't you want all of the information there, at your disposal before making a big agreement? Well, then you should give the kind of information that you would want. And you would want to be told by the realtor, "I don't know," rather than "Yes, yes, it's a good foundation." So treat other people the way that you would want to be treated if you were in their shoes. Contracts entered into by a person induced by duress or undue influence are voidable. Duress means force or threat of force. So sign the contract or I'm going to shoot you. I have a gun to your head. Okay? That is duress. Undue influence is a little different. Undue influence occurs when one is taken advantage of unfairly through a contract by a person who misuses a position of relationship or legal confidence. Say that you go to your attorney and you want your attorney to help you sell this particular piece of land. And your attorney says something like, "Oh, well, legally it's going to be really hard because of a zoning issue, because of this, because of that." But they say, "Hey, you know what? I'll take it off your hands for a tenth of what it's worth." Okay? Then that may be considered undue influence on behalf of the attorney, because they're using their relationship with you or their legal confidence, and that they're misusing that. So if you have a kind of a relationship with someone, say a CPA to your client, a doctor, patient, a psychologist, patient, also think of it like some courts will also think of it as maybe an emotional influence, maybe an emotional undue influence. If you have elderly parents, elderly grandparents, there's been cases where, say, a grandchild goes to visit the elderly grandparent, and then the next thing you know, everything has been deeded over to that grandchild or something, when everyone knows that that grandparent would have been in their right mind, they wouldn't have done that. So those are some of the types of cases where courts may call that undue influence. So just be very careful when dealing with, like I said, older people, or if you're in a client relationship. Do everything you can to be above board and to make the deal as solid and as upfront as you can. Have witnesses and do other things to protect you and to protect your reputation. When there is a mutual mistake as to a material fact inducing a contract, rescission is appropriate. Rescission is spelled R-E-S-C-I-S-S-I-O-N. Rescission. When there is a mutual mistake, okay? Mutual mistake. A bilateral mistake is different. But a bilateral mistake is not sufficient justification for rescission unless the party not mistaken has reason to know that the party mistaken unless the party not mistaken has reason to know that the mistaken party is mistaken. That's confusing. Let me kind of explain that a little bit. First, a mutual mistake. There's a case called Sherwood versus Walker from 1887. This guy named Sherwood wanted to buy a cow from Walker. And he wanted to buy this particular cow called Rose 2D of Aberlone, or Rose 2nd of Aberlone. That was the name of the cow. And both sides thought that the cow was barren. And the difference between a cow that's barren, the value, and a cow that is not barren is pretty big. A cow that's barren, it's used for beef. A cow that's not barren, they can still have offspring. Well, they're worth a lot more because they can keep producing more cows. So they both thought that the cow was barren. They agreed on a price of maybe about $80 or so for the cow. But before Sherwood came to get the cow, he came. Here's the $80. Rose 2D of Aberlone was pregnant, so she was with a little calf, and Walker said, "I'm not going to sell you this cow anymore because now this cow is worth a lot more." Well, the court said because both of them were mistaken about whether this cow was barren or not, because it was a mutual mistake, then the contract could be rescinded. So Walker was able to get out of the contract because both sides had the mistaken belief that this cow was barren. However, a unilateral contract is different. A unilateral mistake is different. Let's say that you are selling a painting to someone, and you think that the painting is by someone that did a very good impression of Monet, maybe that did some of the lilies or something, or some of the Monet paintings. And the person that's buying it from you says, "Oh, no, this is a real Monet," okay? And let's say they buy the painting from you, and it wasn't real, okay? But they were willing to pay you lots and lots of money for it. Well, that's a unilateral mistake. You weren't mistaken, but that person was mistaken. Or if it goes the other way around, you think, hey, it's just a watercolor painting by who knows who, but that person thinks it's Monet, and they buy it, and it turns out to be a Monet and worth millions of dollars, and you sold it to them for $20. That's still a unilateral mistake because only one of the parties was mistaken. You were mistaken in that situation, that scenario. And so if it's a unilateral mistake, you can't get out of it. You can't undo a unilateral mistake. Written versus oral contracts. Oral contracts are generally as enforceable as written ones. You may have heard, everything should be written down, and that may be a good practice, but oral contracts are still generally enforceable. And this is an exception to that general rule, and it's called the Statute of Frauds. In certain situations, the law requires contracts to be in a written, signed format. So there are some contracts that are very important for one reason or another, or might just lend itself to certain types of fraud, that courts say, no, if you're going to have a contract in these areas, then it has to be written. Okay. Contracts that must be in writing are said to fall within the Statute of Frauds. Contracts that fall within the Statute of Frauds include contracts involving an interest in land. So if you're selling land to someone, it needs to be in writing. If you just agree orally to buy land from someone, and maybe they even say, sure, that sounds like a good price, whatever, a court is not going to enforce that because a contract involving land falls within the statute of frauds. A contract to be a surety for someone else. The book says this a little bit different, but I think this is a better word for it, surety. S-U-R-E-T-Y, surety. A surety is a cosigner. When you cosign, for someone else, maybe the bank thinks this other person is a little bit risky. They may not pay back the loan. They don't have a lot of assets. It's a brand new business. And they come to you, or that person comes to you and says, hey, would you co-sign this note for me? You have a lot more money. The bank trusts you. You've been in business a long time. So co-signing something, it's got to be in writing. Contracts that cannot be performed within 1 year have to be in writing. So say a 6-month lease, that doesn't have to be in writing. However, in a 13-month lease would. Also, let's say the contract is indefinite about when it goes to. Let's say the contract is just for you to build the house. And let me use a different example. The contract is for you to build a computer for me. Okay, I agree to pay you $500, and you agree to build a computer for me. That does not fall within the statute of frauds because it could be done within a year. Maybe it'll take 2 years or more than a year, but if it could be done within a year, then it doesn't fall within the statute of frauds. And this is the case even if you think it might take 10 years, okay? The issue is it could be done within a year. If the time is indefinite, if it just says upon completion or if you agree to upon completion or something like that, as soon as you get this done, then I'll pay you whatever, then it could potentially be done within a year. So that doesn't fall within the statute of frauds. Under the UCC, sales of goods of $500 or more must be in writing. $500 or more.